Hi team, Snowflake Dan here with you. Today we're going to be showcasing how to connect your S3 bucket to your Snowflake account to first manually load some JSON data, followed by automating the process of loading CSV data using Snowpipe. So let's get into it. So here on the screen, you'll notice a tutorial. That tutorial is linked in the description below. We'll be using this tutorial in the process so that you can copy code and make the process a lot easier to understand and follow along. So let's get to it. So first thing we'll want to do is actually download some sample data. We'll be using this in the bucket later. And we'll want to go to S3 and actually create a bucket. So I'm going to switch over to my AWS account, select S3, and then I will create a bucket. I will give that bucket a name, aka my name, and then we'll just scroll to the bottom and create the bucket. No need for any special permissioning. That'll happen later on. Great, so we have this bucket. We'll want to load that sample data that we just downloaded into this bucket. So I'm going to open my sample data. It's a zip file, but inside of it there'll be two folders called JSON and CSV. So we'll grab both of those and simply drag them to the S3 bucket. We'll notice we're putting them into those folders and we'll click upload. Great, so now that bucket has those files in it, and we notice that we have CSV and a JSON folder with those files inside of it. Great, let's head back to the tutorial. We'll scroll down. The next thing we'll want to do is actually copy the ARN of the bucket, because we're going to use this later on. So if we go to properties, we'll notice that we can get our ARN here. We'll copy that and we'll move over to Snowflake to paste it in there because we'll use it as a text editor for now. So we'll go to Snowflake, we'll go to projects, we'll start up a new worksheet. So we'll click plus worksheet here. We'll add a comment and we'll paste our ARN. Then we'll want to head back to the tutorial. We'll notice that it wants us to go to IAM, and it wants us to create a new policy, and then we'll copy this code with that ARN. So I'm just going to do that now and head over to Snowflake. We'll paste that in, and then we'll take our ARN. We'll paste that here where it says copy ARN. We'll do that one more time. And then this is for read-only access, but if you want more access, as in to be able to dump data from Snowflake into the S3 bucket, you could go to our documentation and adjust this to be able to write as well. So I'll copy this, head to the tutorial, and it said to create a policy and a new policy. So we'll head back to the S3 bucket, we'll go to IAM, then we'll head over to policy on the left side menu, we'll create a new policy, and then we'll want to switch to the JSON. And so here we could simply just paste our code in, click next. It says I have a syntax error, which is because I copied way too much. So make sure you don't copy everything. We'll then click next, and then we'll provide it a name. So in this case, it'll be Daniel Wilczak, and then I'll simply call it policy so that I can remember this is a policy tied to this bucket. We'll scroll to the bottom, click create policy, and then we can search to find our policy, and there it is. So we'll head back to the tutorial and continue to follow along. Here, showing us to do all of that. And the next step is we'll want to create a role. Then we'll want to go to we'll select AWS account, the account, require external ID, and put in 4 zeros. So let's do that now. So we'll head over, we'll go to roles, we'll click create role. We'll select AWS account, the account itself, require external ID. And in here, the reason we're putting 4 zeros is because we'll go along and update it later when Snowflake gives us some information back to update those numbers. So we'll click next. We'll select our policy. So I'll simply look up Daniel Wilczak policy. We'll select that policy, click next, and we'll give the role a name. Again, I like to follow the best practice of just calling it the bucket and then what it's for. We'll click create role, and our role has been created. Great. Let's head back to the tutorial. Notice we went through all of those steps. We'll now want to head over and click our role and copy that ARN number. So we'll go over, we'll click our role, we'll copy that ARN, and then the next part is we'll want to paste that in. And so we could paste that in at the top if we want to have all of the things that we've copied earlier. Great. Head back to the tutorial, and the tutorial will now want us to create a few things inside of Snowflake. So I'll copy that code and we'll head back to our notepad or worksheet inside of Snowflake. We'll take all of that JSON, and since we don't need it anymore, we'll paste in our new code. And you'll notice that it says to copy the role ARN here and then the bucket name as well. So we'll copy our role ARN and we'll paste it where it says role ARN here. And the next part is the bucket name, and I just remember it, so it was Daniel Wilczak. And then I'm going to walk through kind of what we're going to accomplish here by running all of this code. So the first thing is we're going to switch to sysadmin so that we can create things. We don't want to run it using account admin because then no one else can see it. We'll then create a database called raw. We'll create a schema called AWS. We'll need a warehouse because we'll need some compute to be able to load this data in. And then finally, we'll use account admin because account admin has the privilege to be able to connect outside of Snowflake or create these integrations so that they can talk outside of Snowflake. Then we'll create an integration and we'll give it to the sysadmin so that they could use that. And then we'll finally get some IDs back, or ARN and user external IDs, so we can update some stuff in S3. So we'll select all of that. We'll click run. And then you might run into this issue where an object might be created. In my case, I've already created it. So I'll simply go and drop it just to showcase you can drop the integration as well. Great, so now it's gone. And then we'll click from here on and run it again. So we'll simply hit run. And then we'll notice that the ARN and an external ID is given. So perfect. So we'll go back to the tutorial. We'll scroll down and we'll want to go to role, and then we'll want to click on trusted relationship and then click edit trusted relationship. And so we have some code down here that we're going to paste in there. So I'll simply copy this first. We'll head to Snowflake again, and we'll go down a few lines of code. We'll notice that it requires that user ARN and that external ID. So I'll first copy my user ARN. I'll paste that here. And then it'll require that external ID. So we'll simply paste that here as well. So I'll copy all of this JSON. I'm actually going to cut it because we won't use it again. So I'll head back to my role, and then to the trusted policy. So we'll go to roles, select the role, trusted relationships, edit trusted relationship, and then paste it in there. And then we'll click update policy. Perfect. So now we have our policy updated. We could head back to the Snowflake account, and we'll notice here it says to edit that trusted policy. We've already accomplished that. And the next part will be we'll start loading some data in. So finally, we've gotten to the point, most of this has been in AWS, but finally we can start doing things in Snowflake by loading that data we had as sample data. So I'll copy that code. We can take all of this and remove it all, and I'll paste in the new code. And we'll notice that we have a few lines here. First thing first, we're going to set the context. Again, we want to make sure that we're using the right role, the right database, the right schema, and the right warehouse. Next, we'll want to create what's known as a stage. A stage is a folder that exists inside of Snowflake. And so we'll see in a few seconds of how you can go about manipulating that. So we'll go through, we'll add our bucket name here. The reason we add our bucket name here again is that storage integration could have more than just one bucket inside of it. It could have a whole bunch of allowed buckets. And so here we have to preference which bucket we want to access. So I want to access the S3 bucket. So I'll simply select all of this and hit run on it. And then we'll notice that we now have a stage. And if we wanted to see this, we can go into the raw database, into the AWS schema, and then into the stage. And we'll notice that we have an S3 stage there now. So if I open that stage up to see its details, we'll want to select a warehouse. So I'll select the development one. And then we'll notice we now can access that bucket from our Snowflake account. We can go in there, click on the folders, and be able to see the data. So great. So the next thing we'll want to do is head back to our worksheet and do the next few steps. So like I said, we're going to load JSON manually and then move on to the automated process of loading CSV. So let's create a file format called JSON as our first step. Then we'll want to create a table called JSON. And in here, we'll want the file name that we're loading and additionally the data that's inside of that file. So we'll create that table, and then from there, we'll want to copy the data that lives in the folder. So there could be hundreds of files in that folder, and just by specifying the folder name, in this case, it's the stage name, and then the folder name that lives inside of S3, we could load all of those files in one manual copy into statement. So let's do that. So here we're going to say copy into JSON, the file name, the data itself, and then here we're doing a select statement of metadata file name, aka we want the file name. Then we'll load all the data into that data column. And we'll use the S3 stage, and then we'll load, we'll take the JSON folder. So I'll simply run that. And from here, we'll notice that it's saying that we've got one row parsed because that JSON file only has one row in it. But if we wanted to see that data, we could simply do a select star from. And if you want to help automating this process, if we do a quick refresh on the left side, we'll notice we have that table. We could simply go over, click the three dots, place name and editor, and we'll notice the database, the schema, and the table has been added for us. We'll add a semicolon to the end and hit run. And we'll notice now that the table has been added. We have our file name and we have some JSON data. So if I open this up, you'll notice that we have native JSON loaded into Snowflake. So I can go and query that, but that's not the goal of like how to query JSON inside of Snowflake. We're simply showcasing how to load that data. Great. So now we can head back to the tutorial, and the next part we'll want to do is go through the automatic loading process, or what we call Snowpipe inside of Snowflake. So we'll copy the next block of code. We'll go back to our worksheet. We'll lower this down, and we'll again paste over all of that. Now we're going to set the context one more time. And this time I'm going to be really lazy, and I don't feel like writing the table itself. So Snowflake has what's called infer schema. Basically, you could take a file or a set of files inside of a folder and say, hey, create the schema for this table, because I don't want to write out all those column names. So what we can do is simply create that. But before we do that, I'll showcase how to do this in the UI. So we could simply go back to that S3 stage, and I'll select my warehouse, but this time I'll set it as my default so I don't have to do that again. And then we can go to that CSV folder, and we'll notice that we have a file inside of here. So we'll simply click load into table, give it a name. Maybe we call this one example. We'll click next. And then we'll notice that Snowflake has inferred the schema for us, and it's using the UI to achieve that. So if I wanted to, I could simply click load and load that data in. And then the data has been loaded into an example table. Now, this is the way to do it in the UI, but I want to do it via code so that I can automate the process later. So I'll simply go back to my code. I'll create a file format called infer, and then I'll create a table called CSV off of that S3 CSV folder, because it's going to look at all the files inside of there. In our case, it's only one, but it'll create it. So I'll simply click create the CSV, and we'll notice if we do a quick refresh, we'll notice we have example, which if we click in and on it, we notice that it had that XY columns. But if we click on our CSV, we'll notice we have the exact same thing going on. So perfect. So the next thing we'll want to do is actually automate the process of loading data in there. And so this copy into statement, we're just going to wrap a create pipe around it. So we've got our traditional copy into statement, which we saw with the JSON, but this time we're going to create a pipe around that copy into statement. So I'll simply run this. And now we'll notice if I do a quick refresh, we now have a file format area and we have pipes. And so we have our CSV pipe created. But there's no way for Snowflake and AWS to have this conversation that a file has been dropped in S3. Hey, Snowflake, go load it. So what we'll have to do is set up the event notification on S3 to tell Snowflake, hey, a file has been dropped. So what we'll want to do is run a show pipes and then get the SQSQ from it. This is a string that essentially we could put into AWS or into our buckets notification. So we'll simply copy that. We'll head back to our tutorial, and if we scroll down, what we'll want to do is go back to the bucket, click properties, click create event notification, and then click start type or give it a name, of Daniel Wilczek notification. So let's do that. So let's go back. We'll type in S3, go S3. We'll find our bucket. We'll go to properties, and then we'll want to scroll down the point where we see create event notification. And here we'll again give it a name. So Daniel Wilczek notification. And then we'll want to select all objects create events. This basically just means that any kind of object that's created, Snowflake will be notified of it. And then we'll want to scroll all the way down and we'll want to select the SQSQ and enter SQS ARN. Perfect. And we'll paste our ARN there and we'll click Save Changes. Great. So now our bucket and our Snowflake account are now integrated via the pipe and AWS's notification system inside of the S3 bucket. Great. So how do we prove this works? So we'll head back down, we'll scroll down, and we'll notice that we can do a alter pipe refresh. And what this means is that Snowflake will refresh and say, hey, is there any files that I haven't loaded yet? So we'll hit run on that, and we'll notice that one file has been added. It's what's known as sent. So that means that Snowflake is now going to go fetch the file and load it into the table. And so if we quickly do a select star from, and we grab that path, and we hit run, we'll notice that no files have been added yet, but in a few moments, as we add more data to the bucket, we'll notice that that data will come in. So to prove out that Snowpipe can load the data automatically, what we'll want to do is actually take our old sample data and just rename the CSV, and we're going to dump it back into the bucket. So let's open up our old data or our sample data. And we notice we have sample 1 here. I'm simply going to do a quick rename and call it sample 2. And we'll keep that there for a second. We'll head back to Snowflake and then we'll just do a quick select star from. And we'll notice that our data has been added. So what I want to do to prove that it works is actually going to do a count star here. And we'll notice that we have 10 records. So if we go back to our S3 bucket, we go back to our objects and we go to our CSV folder and we now go to upload, we can now go back to our downloads folder where that new file is, and we can simply drag it to the screen, click upload, and then we can close it and go in and see that we now have 2 sample files in here. So if I've set up Snowpipe correctly, it should take roughly about 30 seconds to load this new one in. So if we head back to our Snowflake account and we rerun our count star, we'll notice that it's still 10, but if we give it roughly about 20 to 30 seconds, we should see that count jump up to 20 because we've just doubled the file. And so here we could see that the file has been loaded actually relatively quickly within 10 seconds. And so now we can see a count star of around 20 seconds. So this has been connecting your Snowflake account to your S3 storage via manual loading or a stage, and then transitioning into using Snowpipe to automate the process of loading CSVs. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.